And we're all aware of the impacts of IAS. You've been hearing it all through this workshop. It is the leading driver in biodiversity loss, and it's also impacting in the Caribbean's ability to it's impacting on the Caribbean's ability to attain food security as well, and the tourism industry. And there are several pathways for the introduction of IAS into the Caribbean. I'm going to consider 10 of them today. Most of them came out of the work of Dr. Heike Messiner in collaboration with the CISWIC Working Group in 2009. In fact, 8 out of the 10 came out from that report, and the additional 2 are 2 new pathways that some attention is being paid to. And these 10 include the human movement pathway, airline passenger baggage, international garbage, e-commerce, maritime traffic, wood packaging material, forestry-related pathway, plant propagative material pathway, natural spread, and international meal. So the very first, the human movement pathway, and this is pretty straightforward. This is where the movement of people between countries contribute to the spread of pests, and they do this in several ways. People can carry pests on themselves, on their clothing, on their shoes. Weed seeds can attach themselves onto clothes and shoes and be moved from one area to the other by transporting pests on objects that are brought or taken from an area. And the example here is handicraft. And here in the Caribbean, we produce a lot of handicraft that are made from natural materials. And these have the potential of harboring pests, intentionally collecting the pests and taking it to a different location. And it is believed that that is how giant African snail got into the Caribbean, where someone intentionally brought it in, and smuggling. And this is an example is the illegal movement of pets and game animals into the Caribbean. So how humans move around, the mechanisms by which humans move around, also aid and abet in the spread of pests. And here in the Caribbean, we use 2 main mediums. We travel by air and by sea. And in terms of air travel, a 17-year-long study done at the US port of entry found that 62% of intercepted pests were associated with passenger baggage. This is US data, but it has implications just here in the Caribbean, as a large majority of visitors to the Caribbean arrive by air. And we'll discuss this a little further when we go into the airline passenger baggage pathway. But I just wanted to mention that Russell in '87 took it a little further. He looked at the aircraft itself, and he determined that insects were able to survive long international flights in the wheelbase of Boeing 747. So it's a major pathway for the introduction of invasives. Cruise ship passengers, these are very similar to airline passengers. They have baggage, and they have the potential to carry weed seeds, plant pathogens, as well as small insects in their shoes and their clothing. And the thing that makes cruise ship passengers so important is that they island hop. They don't just visit one island, they move around. So you have the ability to spread pests in several different countries or islands. Private boats, yachters, inter-island ferries, and small commercial boats. These particular types of vessels move around in the Caribbean, usually unchecked. And there is a high likelihood or possibility that they have on them or in them plant material of quarantine concern, so it's a major pathway that has to be considered. And Dr. Messiner actually rated the human movement pathway, the pest risk associated with the human movement pathway, as very high, because humans have the potential to facilitate the spread of pests, as well as a large number of visitors that enter into the Greater Caribbean region. And we here in the Caribbean largely have insufficient and inadequate level of phytosanitary safeguards. And all of this leads to second pathway. This was not really considered by Dr. Messiner, but it's being considered, and attention is being paid to it by FAO, and it's international garbage. And garbage arrives in connection with every type of transportation that exists in the Greater Caribbean region. And FAO actually has identified, I should say, international garbage as a serious pathway for the introduction of pests. And they have made amends to their phytosanitary inspection procedures in 2013 to tell people how to address international garbage. Third pathway, airline passenger baggage, and this was mentioned previously in the human movement pathway. But Dr. Messina and the group came up with something called the planned quarantine approach rate. And this is a percentage of passenger groups arriving at a border with quarantine material in their luggage. And there's an overall planned quarantine approach rate of 3.75 for travelers in the US. Change it. And out of the 25 countries of origin with the highest planned quarantine approach rates, 10 of them originated from the Greater Caribbean region, Haiti being the highest at 21%, Dominica bringing up the rear at 8%. Even though this data was collected at US ports of entry, it has implications to us here in the Greater Caribbean region, given that most of the residents or citizens from these various countries traverse the Caribbean in themselves. So if they can carry quarantine material to the US, the likelihood of them carrying it within the Caribbean is very high as well. And Dr. Messina and the Sewsaran group rated the pest risk associated with this pathway as medium, mainly because the visitors into the Greater Caribbean region come from temperate regions, and they usually have the low planned quarantine material approach, so they are less likely to travel with planned quarantine material. Fourth pathway, the maritime pathway, or what is also known as trade, and there are several ways in which pests can be disseminated by the maritime traffic. They can be disseminated with commodities, both of agricultural and non-agricultural importance, as well the hitchhiking pests on vessels and containers used for transport. And the example that everyone knows probably is giant African snail, but some consideration is being paid to flying insects that are attracted by lights that are on at these sea cargo container areas. And these insects, they come and they land on the sea cargo containers and they remain there. And usually they move from various places on the sea cargo containers. Wood packaging material accompanying commodities. As we all know, wood packaging material must be treated in a particular manner. It must bear a stamp, but also it must be inspected for hitchhiking pests as well. Ballast water with ships, and this is of importance because ballast water contains a lot of biological material, plants, animals, bacteria, and viruses as well. And in the Caribbean, it's believed that the green mussel was established here through ballast water. And international garbage, this was mentioned before as well. The Greater Caribbean region serves as a major crossroads for international maritime trade. We are smack dab in the middle between northern, southern, east, and western hemispheres, and it is an important area that facilitates trade. And it's expected that maritime traffic will continue to grow in the Caribbean. But Dr. Messina and the Sewsaran group did not offer a ranking for maritime pathway, but given everything that we've heard and seen, I'd like to recommend that we consider this as a very high pest risk. Fifth, wood packaging material. This is a well-established pathway, mainly because it accompanies every or large majority of consignments, and that is why ISPM 15 was developed. And wood packaging material is generally made from low-quality wood or various qualities of wood, and it's often reused, remanufactured, or reconditioned, and it tends to move across the globe. And it's very hard to determine the origin of wood packaging material. And because of this, it was ranked, the pest risk associated with wood packaging material, it was rated as very high. Forestry-related pathway, and this has to do with the trade of forest materials and products. And they include things like wood products like lumber and timber, non-wood products like medicinal plants, edible fungus, leaves, trees for planting, for reforestation initiatives in various countries. And the thing about this is each of these forest products have the potential to harbor forest pests, which has implications to both forests as well as agricultural production in the importing countries. So we need to ensure that importing countries screen and inspect forest-related material. As well, pests that originate with agricultural products may represent a threat to both forests as well as agricultural production, things like scales and whiteflies, mealybugs. And due to the large number of pests associated with forest products, and the fact that some of the world's most serious invasive pests are forest pests, it was ranked as very high. An international meal. This is usually an overlooked pathway. Little consideration is paid to this pathway. But if you look at the example here from the US, you'd see that the common categories of high-risk items that are found in both public and private meals include things like fresh fruit, propagative plant materials, seeds, and things like snails and soil. And the same can be said for meal in the Greater Caribbean region, where 14,000 to 15,000 meal packages have been received per annum with plant material or plant pests, and 4,000 of this contain propagative material. And the pest risk associated with this pathway was rated as medium. But at the time that this study was done in 2009, little consideration was given to online shopping and the fact of online shopping. And little consideration was given to online shopping. We'll touch on this a little bit later. And the eighth pathway, plant propagative material, infected or infested plant material is often considered as one of the primary sources for IAS into a country. And the thing about propagative material is that pests that are introduced with propagative material has a great advantage, mainly because it's being moved on a host plant together with its host plant into a climate that's conducive for both the growth of the plant as well as the pest. And when it moves, as we all know, when a pest moves into a new area, it usually does not have natural controls that could immediately deal with the pest, so it will rapidly colonize. In the Caribbean region, we have a high demand for propagative material and strongly linked to tourism. I'll give you two quick examples of the negative impacts of bringing in infested plant material. One is in Nevis, where the Four Seasons Hotel brought in some plants, and in doing that, they brought in lethal yellowing, which has now spread to St. Martin, Antigua, and St. Kitts. And then Aruba, they brought in fully grown palm trees, and in doing that, they brought in red palm weevil into Aruba. And plant propagative material in itself can become invasive. And I'll give you a quick example here in Jamaica, where wild coffee, wild ginger, and ginger lilies were brought in for ornamental purposes, but now it is actually displacing natural vegetation. So some consideration needs to be given to the fact that propagative material in itself can become invasive. And the brand new pathway, e-commerce pathway. And this is new. This came out of the growing concerns of internet sales, as I mentioned before. And the IPPC in 2012, in their draft paper, indicated that e-commerce is becoming increasingly common and presents another pathway by which many small and often uneasily recognizable consignments can enter into a country. And e-commerce comes with potential phytosanitary risks, as packages tend to move quickly from point of sale to the consumer without being intercepted by or inspected by NPPOs. And finally, natural spread pathway. This has to do with the spread of pests through passive mediums such as wind, ocean, and storms. And this is particularly important to us here in the Caribbean because we have prevailing trade winds, tropical storms, and hurricanes. And this risk has been ranked as medium. And here's a quick example. The sugarcane smut is believed to have been carried from Africa through the northeast trade wind. And it came into Guyana in 1974, and every consecutive year after that, it infected another country or several countries. And it took just 7 years to infect 16 countries. And it was due to the prevailing trade winds, such rapid spread. As well, the causal agent for black sigatoka was also believed to have come in this way. And hurricanes, we have to consider hurricanes as well, because hurricanes have played a major role in the spread of Asian citrus canker bacterium and the bean golden mosaic virus. And it's also been a factor in the dispersal of some insect groups. Somewhere around the 1970s or 1980s there, we had some we discovered some African desert locusts, but they never established themselves in the Caribbean, mainly because they were so battered by the force of the hurricane that they could not establish themselves. But we need to be prepared for the likelihood of invasives, because they will come. Kahn in 1977 coined the hypothesis, the inevitability of establishment hypothesis, that basically states that all harmful organisms will eventually gain access to all regions of the world, because planned quarantine and quarantine can only do so much. It's inevitable. And the natural spread pathway, as well as e-commerce and globalization, gives credence to this. So how do we mitigate against invasive alien species? Dr. Heike Messenger gave a number of recommendations, only a few that I'll consider here. First, the development of planned legislation, and the previous speaker was speaking about this, he mentioned this. And we should have three key areas or components in planned legislation: the prevention, where you consider those commodities and consider the pathways and vectors associated with those commodities that countries regularly import. Early detection, where you have national surveys, you need to know what you have and what you want to keep out. And there's an example, they have the CPDN. This is a collaborative network between the USD and the University of Florida that helps with the rapid diagnostic of plant pests. You must have rapid response, and each country is encouraged to have emergency preparedness plans. Education and outreach, especially when you're dealing with things like international mail, passenger baggage, and e-commerce, it's important to sensitize public. And we have one initiative that's going on right now in the Caribbean, Don't Pack a Pest, and you'll hear a little bit about this from Mr. Deshi on Friday. Dr. Messina also recommended that training be done, and it's important to train and retrain planned quarantine officers and all stakeholders, especially in light of new developments. And again, there's an initiative going on in the Caribbean, USDA, GCSI in collaboration with the UWI, to host the planned quarantine principles and procedures training course. This will be the 4th year. And another recommendation was the establishment of regional action-oriented groups to coordinate and carry out region-wide exotic species efforts. And there is one such group, the Caribbean Plant Health Directors Group, with its 6 technical working groups, and you'll hear a little more about this one as well on Friday. And finally, a final recommendation was the web-based clearinghouse of information, and the USDA in collaboration with CABI has been working on the CISAnet.org website, and in April and around May 2004, the USDA will launch the Regional Fruit Fly Interface Database that will give some real-time information of fruit fly trapping and surveillance. And thank you. Any questions?